They are some of the most famous words in history, and they were spoken by Neil Armstrong.
Neil Armstrong was memorialized in Hollywood with a floral arrangement today.
The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the medical monitors that pulsed like slow, persistent stars. Outside the window, early evening gathered along the horizon, the kind of gentle blue that comes just before darkness fully collects. Neil sat quietly, his features thinner than the world remembered, but his eyes, sharp, attentive, almost calculating, seemed to hold an entire lifetime in their depths. He had spent decades refusing the spotlight, slipping away from interviews, sidestepping dramatic retellings, insisting that the first steps on the lunar surface were triumph enough. Yet time has a curious way of pressing on memory, coaxing secrets from the shadows. And in these final months, something in him stirred, something that had waited too long. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The people closest to him had grown accustomed to his silence on certain aspects of the Apollo mission. He spoke openly about engineering, preparation, teamwork, and risk. But whenever the conversation nudged too close to the subjective, the inexplicable, or the personal, he would draw back with a quiet firmness. But the barrier he had maintained for so long finally began to thin. Not through pressure, not through insistence, but through the simple passage of time and the growing weight he felt inside his own story. It was as though the years themselves had loosened the bolts on some compartment within him, one that had remained sealed since 1969. He began one evening, cautiously, almost reluctantly, with fragments of memories that had never found their way into technical reports, mission logs, or televised interviews. His voice carried the hesitance of a man stepping back toward a moment so profound he had never fully trusted language to hold it. For decades, he had mastered the art of speaking without revealing everything, of offering the world a version of events consistent with mission transcripts while keeping one chamber of truth locked away. But as he exhaled and let his gaze drift across the room, something shifted. The memory rose through him with unexpected clarity, ready at last to be carried into the open. He recalled the exact moment their descent engine trembled and the surface of the moon swelled beneath the lunar module. The timing had been razor thin, the fuel nearly exhausted, the terrain less forgiving than anticipated. Every astronaut is trained to focus under pressure, to dampen emotional noise until only procedure remains. But even then, he had felt something else. A presence, a sensation impossible to articulate. It had not been fear, it had not been awe, it was something more like recognition, as though the moon itself were watching them descend, as though they were not arriving at a barren sphere, but entering a domain whose silence held intent. When the lander's metal feet finally kissed the surface, there was no eruption of sound, no cheering beyond the confines of radio static. But inside him, a current ran deep. He remembered pausing with his gloved hand hovering above the hatch before stepping outside, not because he doubted the moment, but because something unspoken pressed back on him from the stillness. The first step had always been described as a triumph of human achievement, but privately he had felt it like a threshold, one crossed in humility, not conquest. His retelling in those final months grew more detailed, more textured, as though each session of memory unlocked a deeper layer beneath it. He spoke of the odd sensation that lingered as soon as he set foot on the lunar soil, a kind of tremor in perception, subtle but undeniable. The landscape stretched in every direction with the appearance of perfect emptiness, yet he had felt observed, not threatened, not judged, simply observed as though the moon were not an object, but a host aware of its visitor. He had never devoted himself to myth-making, nor had he been one to romanticize the unknown. But he described a moment in which the shadows seemed arranged too deliberately, as though the angles between rock and darkness created a structure of attention rather than a coincidence of geology. Something about that arrangement lingered behind his thoughts for years, resurfacing without warning, unanchored to language yet impossible to discard. The most difficult part for him to articulate came later in the moonwalk, when he ventured a little farther from the lander. The surface was quiet beneath him, the sky a well of eternal night. But then there came a sensation he could neither quantify nor justify through physics alone. It was a shift, a slight but distinct distortion around him, like the feeling of walking into a room where someone had been thinking intensely just moments before. He found himself turning, half expecting movement, though the horizon remained still. In those final months when he finally allowed himself to speak freely, he gave shape to that sensation. He described it not as an encounter, not as an apparition, but as a presence embedded in the lunar environment itself, something ancient, something aware, something that had been waiting long before human eyes ever turned toward the sky with intention. He had not seen figures or structures. Instead, he spoke of impressions that operated just beneath conscious thought, like echoes from a realm that communicated without words. It was something that made the silence of the moon feel inhabited, the way a cathedral feels inhabited even when empty. He felt guided, in a sense, as though unseen lines of significance had been drawn across the surface long before the first footprint pressed into the dust. He emphasized that none of it interfered with the mission. Every technical requirement was fulfilled, every step executed with precision. Yet layered beneath the procedural clarity, he sensed an intelligence embedded in the environment. Not extraterrestrial in the sensational sense, not anthropomorphic or physical, but a kind of profound stillness that permeated the place. A stillness that seemed to contain intention, memory, and meaning. He said he had always known humanity would interpret such ideas through the filters of myth, religion, science fiction, or skepticism. This was why he had locked those impressions away. He had seen how the world hungrily dissected each detail of the Apollo mission, how conspiracy theorists and enthusiasts alike tangled fact with imagination. He did not want to add fuel to fantasies, nor diminish the rigor of the work that landed them there, but he also knew that something real had been experienced, something that no transcript could ever capture. As he continued, he described an inner shift that occurred while he stood beside the flag, the earth suspended behind him like a delicate marble. At that moment, a clarity passed through him with such force that he nearly staggered. The earth, as seen from that vantage point, was not just a world, it was a fragile, luminous thought held in the vastness of space. He felt intimately that consciousness, the human ability to observe, to reflect, to question, was itself the rarest phenomenon. And the moon, in its silent way, seemed to acknowledge this awareness, as though it had been waiting for a mind capable of perceiving its stillness not as emptiness, but as message. He spoke of one brief instant during the EVA when radio static fuzzed lightly in his ears, but at the same time he sensed something more, a depth behind the silence, something akin to a hum but not a sound. It was like the emotional resonance of a word before it is spoken, a communication without language. He could not describe it except to say that it felt as though the moon was not simply a location, but a participant. He had spent years studying geology, engineering, and the harsh realities of space. Nothing in his scientific training prepared him for the feeling that the moon carried an ancient awareness, something that had observed millennia without changing its expression. He did not believe it to be alive in any biological sense, nor inhabited in any conventional sense. But he felt unmistakably that the moon held memory, an echo of something primordial, something older than human comprehension. As the narrative unfolded across those final months, he acknowledged that he had struggled for decades with how to interpret that sensation. He had wondered whether extreme stress or the overwhelming significance of the moment had heightened his perception. Yet each time he revisited the memory, it remained as clear and distinct as the first moment it occurred. It had not faded like a dream. It had not warped like a flawed recollection. It remained untouched, as though sealed within him. He had long resisted sharing this aspect of the moonwalk, because he knew how easily it could be sensationalized. But he also understood that some truths are less about empirical data and more about the profound, impressions that shape a person's understanding of existence. What he felt up there had altered him in ways he never publicly admitted. It was not fear nor confusion, it was reverence. A reverence that expanded his sense of responsibility toward Earth, toward humanity, and toward the unknown. He spoke next of a moment after the camera had been turned away, after the public broadcast concluded. He had been standing alone for a few seconds, the quiet enfolding him like a vast cathedral of night. In that moment, the presence around him grew almost tangible, like a vibration through the ground that did not disturb the dust. It was as if the moon were acknowledging not just his presence, but the presence of humanity itself, as though the arrival of conscious beings on its surface marked a turning point in some greater unfolding. He said he had carried that sensation with him for the rest of his life, buried beneath the layers of normalcy, teaching, family, and the steady march of years. But it had shaped him more deeply than he ever outwardly expressed. It had given him a sense of the delicate interconnectedness between human life and the vast framework of space. The experience made him understand that human exploration was not merely a physical endeavor, but a dialogue between consciousness and cosmos. Toward the end of his recollections, he reflected on the true nature of discovery. He believed that the universe was not simply a collection of distant spheres and cold matter, but a tapestry of meaning waiting for intelligent life to interpret. He felt that stepping onto the moon had opened a channel. Not a literal one, not a communicative channel in any technical sense, but a bridge of understanding between human awareness and the deeper stillness of the cosmos. He had sensed that humanity was not alone, not because other beings shared the universe, but because the universe itself was a kind of silent partner in human curiosity. His final retellings carried a calmness, as though unburdening these memories brought him peace. He did not claim revelation in the dramatic sense. He did not speak of hidden artifacts or secret encounters. What he did reveal was subtler but far more profound. The moon had changed him. Not through spectacle, but through presence. Not through discovery of external phenomena, but through awakening of an internal understanding he had never articulated. He explained that the greatest secrets are rarely objects or events. They are shifts in awareness that occur when a person crosses a threshold into the extraordinary. The moon had offered him such a threshold, and while he respected the boundaries of scientific discipline, he also recognized that some experiences transcend the instruments used to measure them. As he reached the end of his story, he spoke of the moon not as a destination, but as a mirror that reflects humanity's longing to understand itself within the grand silence of the universe. He had gone there expecting exploration, but had encountered reflection. He had expected desolation, but had felt a quiet communion. He had expected to take steps, but instead he felt guided across a landscape shaped by forces older than language. As he eased deeper into the memories he had long suppressed, a new layer of reflection emerged, one that had less to do with the moon itself and more to do with the transformation that had quietly unfolded within him after returning to Earth. It was not a transformation he spoke of publicly, nor even one he fully understood at the time. But in his final months, as he allowed himself the vulnerability of complete honesty, he described a subtle fracture between the man he had been before the mission and the man he became after. The world assumed the shift was a natural consequence of fame, pressure, and the enormity of his accomplishment, but he hinted at something far more interior. He explained that after stepping onto the lunar surface, a kind of perceptual filter he had carried through life dissolved. He returned to Earth seeing the familiar contours of daylight, human movement, and bustling civilization, but something felt fundamentally altered. Roads seemed narrower, buildings heavier. Conversations seemed anchored to concerns that felt strangely miniature, as though set within a scale he could no longer fully inhabit. It was as if a portion of his awareness remained tethered to the boundless quiet he had encountered, unable to fully step back into the rhythms of ordinary life. He never interpreted this as detachment or disillusionment. Instead, he experienced it as a widening of perspective, a permanent recalibration of what mattered. The moon had not merely expanded the horizons of human exploration, it had stretched the dimensions of his inner world. He found himself listening more closely, observing more deeply, and questioning assumptions he once accepted without hesitation. Even the simple act of watching a sunrise carried new significance, infused with the sensation that Earth's beauty was both fragile and profoundly rare. This shift, he admitted, made it difficult at times to engage with the public narrative that surrounded him. Interviews, celebrations, ceremonies, all felt like echoes of a moment whose true meaning could not be conveyed through medals or applause. He had stood on another world, felt its silence pressing into him like a presence, glimpsed the earth from a distance where borders dissolved and humanity appeared as one fragile, luminous thread suspended in darkness. How could such an experience be translated into a soundbite or woven into a public speech? He often found himself retreating into the quiet of his own thoughts, not out of disdain, but because no combination of words felt equal to the experience. In speaking of these years, he revealed something else, an inner restlessness that accompanied him long after the mission. At first, he thought it was simply the consequence of readjusting to normal life after the extraordinary. But over time, he realized the restlessness had a different source. The moon had left him with a question, one that pursued him gently yet persistently. It was not a question he could answer through engineering, logic, or scientific analysis. It was a question that arrived as a sensation, a whisper of intuition that grew clearer with age. He began to sense that the moon had not merely been a passive landscape. Its quiet had carried an invitation to see beyond the frameworks humanity uses to interpret reality. He felt increasingly that consciousness itself was part of a larger fabric, a fabric that stretched across the cosmos like invisible threads connecting distant realms of experience. The lunar silence had hinted at this fabric, offering him a momentary glimpse of a deeper layer of existence. And once that layer had been glimpsed, ordinary perception felt incomplete. He never used mystical language to describe this shift. He preferred subtler expressions. Yet the essence of what he described was unmistakably profound. He sensed that the universe was not indifferent. It was not a cold expanse governed solely by physical forces. Instead, he felt that the universe participated gently, quietly, in the unfolding of awareness. The moon, in its stark stillness, had served as a gateway to this understanding. He spoke also of how this realization shaped his relationships. He became more patient, more present, more deliberate in the way he listened to others. He discovered a deeper appreciation for the complexities of human emotion, recognizing that each person carried their own silent landscape, their own thresholds into wonder or fear. The enormity he had witnessed above Earth made him more attuned to the delicacy of human experience. He learned to see people not as figures within a crowded world, but as unique constellations of hopes, doubts, memories, and dreams. In those reflective conversations during his last months, he disclosed that he often wondered what others might feel if they too could stand on the moon and look back at Earth. Would they sense the same presence he had felt? Would they detect the silent hum beneath the landscape? Would they perceive themselves as participants in a vast, unfolding mystery? He believed that such an experience would shift humanity's trajectory in ways no technology or policy alone could accomplish. Not because of spectacle, but because of perspective. He reflected on a lesser-known moment during the return journey when the spacecraft was midway between worlds. The Earth and Moon both appeared suspended in blackness, each glowing softly, neither dominating the view. In that moment, he felt a balance unlike anything he had encountered before, a sense that he was positioned at a crossroads between realms. The spacecraft hummed steadily around him, a fragile vessel carrying fragile beings through an infinite ocean. Yet he felt no fear. Instead, he felt a serenity that bordered on revelation. For the first time, he sensed himself as part of the cosmos, not separate from it. There was another subtle experience he shared, one that had remained buried for decades because he could not justify it through science or logic. During the journey home, as he drifted in a brief moment of half-wakefulness, he sensed a kind of inner alignment, as though something deep within him resonated with a distant source. It was not a sound, nor a vision, nor a dream. It was more like a correspondence, a recognition that his presence in space was part of a larger pattern he could not yet comprehend. That feeling faded once they re-entered Earth's atmosphere, but it left a trace like the faint scent of something beautiful carried on a breeze. For years afterward, when he gazed at the night sky, that trace would whisper through him. He believed it was connected to the presence he had felt on the moon, though he could never articulate how. He did not claim communication, he claimed recognition. In the final stretch of his recollections, he spoke of acceptance. For much of his life, he wrestled with the tension between what could be spoken and what must remain internal. But as he approached the horizon of his own existence, he felt a profound peace in acknowledging the full truth of his experience. Not as scientific data, not as proof of any extraordinary phenomenon, but as a deeply personal encounter with the universe's mystery. This acceptance allowed him to view his journey not as the pinnacle of human achievement, but as one moment within a cosmic continuum that extends far beyond any single life. The moon had offered him a glimpse of that continuum, and by sharing it, he hoped to spark within others the same kind of contemplation that had quietly shaped him from within. In the end, what he finally revealed was not a secret withheld out of duty or fear, but an experience so intimate, so fundamental to his understanding of existence, that he had spent a lifetime searching for the right moment and the right words to give it form. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what do you think Neil Armstrong hid about the moon landing, and what happens next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.